report. Let's bring in our friend of the show, Neama Rahmani. He's a former federal prosecutor. And Neama, thank you for joining us this evening. I just want to ask right off the top here, what are your key takeaways from today's trial?
Today's trial, wow. I mean, the cross-examination of Stormy Daniels continued, and as expected, it was very aggressive. We saw them attack her credibility, inconsistent statements, and of course, we know that Daniels has changed her story over time. But really, the focus today was that financial motive, and whether it's 6 or 7 figures, how much Stormy Daniels has profited from her one-night affair with Donald Trump. And of course, her social media posts where she's popping champagne bottles and says that she wants to flush that orange turd down the toilet. That was used against her to show bias, that she's arguably there to testify to try to get Donald Trump convicted.
Trump's attorneys are accusing Daniels of changing details of her testimony, which Daniels denies. I'm curious, can that be an issue when a witness tries to recount so many details from something that happened 18 years ago?
Well, that's something that Daniels discussed. She said, when I gave interviews a decade or so ago, or even after the 2016 election, that they didn't ask for the full account like you're asking me here today. Those were shortened versions. They didn't want to get into all the salacious details. And we know that, frankly, most of those salacious details shouldn't have even come into evidence. And the judge chastised the defense attorney, saying, why didn't you object to things like Donald Trump's use of a condom and that type of thing? So I don't think anyone expected all these details to come in like they did Tuesday. So I think the parties were a little bit more careful today. They didn't get into all that, but really get into those biases and there's motives that Daniels may have had to lie.
Daniels was on the stand for 7.5 hours. I'm curious, is that typical for a witness of her caliber, somebody that's this critical in this case?
It's not typical, but obviously I think things got a little bit out of hand. The parties talked about the guardrails because, as the prior lawyers were saying, really, we're talking about false business records. We're talking about payments to Michael Cohen. Were they legal expenses? Were they, reimbursement for hush money? The fact that the affair happened or not isn't really that relevant to the case. Now, the prosecution says that the defense made it relevant when they said that the entire affair was untrue. But really, if you're just looking at the charges in the case, those 34 counts, the fact that this affair happened isn't entirely dispositive one way or another. So the fact that we spent the greater part of 2 days on Stormy Daniels really is a head scratcher.
Let's get to Judge Merchan. We saw today as he issued a double denial, denying a mistrial effort and then an effort to change the gag order. I'm curious, what do you make of how the judge has handled such a high-profile case?
He's doing the best he can, and let's start with a mistrial motion. I think that was right, and this is why. If the defense doesn't timely object and the answer comes in, you waive your opportunity to object later, either in a mistrial motion or in an appeal. You have to object to preserve the record as a lawyer, and obviously the objection is overruled and the judge makes the error, then of course you have your motion, but you can't let the evidence come in and then say, hey, judge, I want to start all over. The only time that happens is if it's a clear legal error, and I don't see that in this case. I think the gag order is a closer call. Sorry, Austin.
No, go ahead. Yeah, mention the second one.
The gag order, I think, is a closer call, and I do think Trump can fairly respond to Stormy Daniels publicly. I think Judge Merchan is so fed up with Trump violating the gag order in these 10 other instances, he didn't want to open the door and say, hey, you can respond to Stormy Daniels and everything she said publicly. I just don't think that he trusted him to stay within the confines of a revised or expanded gag order.
So now that Daniels is done testifying, what are you looking ahead to, be it tomorrow or be it later in the trial?
Austin, all eyes are on Michael Cohen. He, of course, is a star witness here. Again, another problematic witness. If we talked about Stormy Daniels and her motivations, whether they be financial or story changing, Michael Cohen is a convicted felon. He's someone who's an admitted liar. Even the previous witnesses that have testified impeached his credibility, folks like David Pecker and Keith Davidson. So that cross-examination is going to last days. He, of course, is the star witness, is going to try to connect all the dots, but we know that the defense is going to argue that this is a disgruntled former employee who's been prosecuted for lying, and he has a motive to do so in this case.
Former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani, as always, we appreciate your analysis. Take care.
Thanks, Austin.